Before we begin our presentation, I'd like to run everyone through a few housekeeping items. During today's webinar, only the host will be able to see the list of all attendees. All participants' lines will be muted to ensure there is no background noise. Following our presentation, we will be holding a Q&A session. If you have a question at any time for our speakers during the presentation, feel free to submit it using the Q&A tab located on your screen. You can also submit your questions at the end of the session. For any questions our speakers won't have time to answer today, we'll make sure to follow up with you after the event. We are recording today's webinar, and we plan to send out a follow-up email to all registrants with a link to the recording and presentation slides within the next couple of days. For those of you joining us for CLE credit, in order to qualify, you must remain logged into the presentation for its entire duration, and you must be an attorney to be eligible. Your attendance is being recorded and compiled for a report that will be sent to our CLE administrators. CLE has been approved for New York, New Jersey, and California. If you're interested in obtaining CLE for your state, please reach out to me by tomorrow, and we will apply for credit on your behalf. In the next couple of days, we will send a link that will allow you to obtain your certificate of attendance. With that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today's presentation. We are joined by MarkMonitor experts Camilla Herron and Maya Markovich. Cami comes from a DEA intelligence background, moving into the private sector with Microsoft as their regional intelligence analyst for the Asia-Pacific region, working and providing support to the regional investigative team, working transnational investigations in 10 countries for 4 years. Returning to the U.S., she worked as Symantec's brand protection manager for North and South America for just under 2 years prior to moving to Apple as a contract corporate investigator. Late in 2009, she moved to Monster Cable Products, designing, implementing, and running their global brand protection program for over 4 years. She's recently moved to MarkMonitor as their senior brand protection consultant based in San Francisco. Maya is a senior product marketing manager at MarkMonitor. She has primary product marketing responsibility for MarkMonitor anti-counterfeiting technology and services. Her experience ranges from strategic technology adoption in the legal arena to developing best practices and identifying industry trends. Maya practiced as a plaintiff-side attorney, plaintiff-side civil litigator prior to entering the tech industry on the product side in 2006. Joining MarkMonitor in 2014 to craft targeted brand protection solutions for clients in a variety of verticals. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Maya to get us started.
Great, thank you, Gina. So once again, welcome everybody. We've actually really got a great mix of folks listening in from different industries and different internal departments, from legal to compliance and some security. So I really hope we can have some great Q&A at the end of our presentation. As we go along, please feel free to enter those questions as Gina suggested, and hopefully we can have a good back and forth once Cami and I have gone through our materials. So we'll start off with a snapshot of current counterfeiting challenges and a brief discussion of the unique susceptibility of the online channel. We'll go on to cover the prevalence of counterfeiting, what's being counterfeited, the life cycle of establishing, promoting, and defending brand against online and offline counterfeit threats. And we'll talk about the real-world impacts of counterfeiting, how to assess the risk of counterfeiting for your own organization, and what a comprehensive brand protection strategy would look like. We'll talk about what makes up a powerful online anti-counterfeiting program, and then move on to how to put together a program that bridges both digital and physical enforcement to cover both ends of the spectrum. So, and we'll close out with some key tips and takeaways. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So the current landscape of what's out there, counterfeiting, intellectual property infringement, gray market trade are really destroying business value across industries. Basically, whenever there's an opportunity to be detected, a product is being counterfeited and distributed both online and offline. Counterfeiting is really a global cross-sector problem. Counterfeits are slated to generate an economic loss of about $1.3 trillion this year. That's from the International Chamber of Commerce's Counterfeiting Intelligence Bureau. And another way of really looking at it is that counterfeit sales represent 7% of all global trade. The demand for brands is being really filled by fakes. In the main targets, according to U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, last year were luxury and apparel, consumer electronics, pharma, and as well as automotive. The availability and consumption of these fakes, in many cases, are really having very dangerous outcomes depending on the product. Obviously, so automotive and pharmaceuticals, some of the obvious ones with high risk to consumers. But fake products, also like consumer electronics issued with defective batteries, they're also not uncommon, not to mention, the lost revenue and higher marketing costs when fake versions of products are so easy to get. And so it's really having a chilling effect on international trade as well as innovation. Some foreign governments are working to weaken IP laws that protect our U.S. patents, and that's obviously threatening to slow innovation by undermining the incentives. So the numbers we just talked about are really an illustration of the counterfeiting problems overall. At a really high level, the internet is truly the most vulnerable business channel across any company. So we'll go into some examples in a little bit, but to give you an idea of scope, last year business-to-consumer e-commerce sales increased from 20% from 2013, and I think this is really primarily due to the rapidly expanding online and mobile user bases in emerging markets, and also, there are improvements in shipping capabilities and payment options, and the push into these new international markets. So as an example, in 2014, consumers in Asia Pacific actually spent more on online purchases than consumers in North America. So that's really makes it the largest e-commerce region in the world, and it's also the most, the region with these exploding manufacturing capabilities and of making the genuine and fake products. So we're really talking about a sales channel here that has unprecedented traffic and a lot of vulnerabilities. One area that makes it particularly difficult to gain any sort of headway with online brand infringement is that within any given company, there might be multiple disparate teams working on different angles of the internet business channel. So when teams are working in silos like this, teams can be duplicating efforts, and this can obviously lead to unnecessarily burning through independent budgets. And not only that, but sometimes what one department is doing can be interfering with what another department is trying to accomplish. So, for example, like a legal department may want to strictly enforce online against infringers or file civil suits against them, and security might be working towards a criminal investigation on the same target. Targets can be overlapping and conflicting like this, and these efforts can just get in each other's way. Also, when you have information on online infringements coming in from various sources, and there's no real process of acquiring and analyzing this information, taking these bits and pieces is not really going to make any progress against the problem. You're not going to be able to figure out the holes that need to be prioritized and addressed. When these different types of data sources, like online enforcement success rates on various tactics or different marketplaces, if they're not analyzed against other information, for example, customer service complaints are often the most current source to take the pulse of what's happening out there, but this source is often ignored, and there's almost no way to really get to the root of the problem or figure out the scope of the online counterfeiting problem for a particular brand. So what's the end result of all this? The bad guys are profiting from this lack of control and end-to-end visibility of the supply chain, and that can lead to things like, obviously the risks for consumers, loss of revenue for the legitimate players, inventory mismanagement, and a lack of real-time business intelligence, so you can't really do anything with what you're gathering. And the worst part is that brands don't know what they don't know. So they often think they're making concerted efforts, which could actually be losing money and causing this, irreparable brand damage. So let's just get a little bit deeper into what's going on with these counterfeiters. So why are things being counterfeited and sold online? There are some fairly obvious reasons, but I really think it bears repeating so everyone understands the reality. Number one, it's very easy to hide your identity. Online, counterfeiters can be almost anonymous. You know, there's no physical space or personal identity associated with any sale. Number 2, selling online is very easy. If they're caught, they can simply throw up another site or listing, or sometimes they even have inactive sites that are ready to go, and they can just reactivate them if another one goes down. And they can constantly stay a step ahead and pop up again somewhere else. It's much easier for them, obviously, than if they're selling fake purses on a street corner, because they're online in this constantly fluid space versus a brick-and-mortar static location that are easier to identify and take action against. Also, the volume of fake goods is rapidly increasing, partly because of the skyrocketing manufacturing capabilities in countries like China, as I mentioned before. So, you know, there's more to sell. Number 3, it's also less risky for the scammers. If they're identified, the penalty is just not as severe. It's actually almost non-existent, due in part to this anonymity and the lack of investment that they have to make in order to have an outlet for counterfeit goods online. A lot of companies don't do any brand protection, so they're an easy target. And, you know, counterfeiters are free to do whatever they want against that brand and utilize that brand equity for their own purposes. And lastly, you know, the motive, clearly there's lots of money to be made here. As for the victims, obviously with the global reach of the internet, they really can be all over the world. One scammer can have really as many consumer victims as they have counterfeit products. And brands also suffer in myriad ways. We'll get into the impact on brands in a second, but in general, businesses really just have major difficulty quantifying these financial losses as a result of counterfeit or diverted versions of their legitimate products. So here are just some of the types of products that are widely counterfeited. As you can see, it obviously crosses industry boundaries, can have a massive impact on revenue across the board. You know, some products don't cause bodily injury if they're fake. So sometimes people feel it's not really a crime to buy a counterfeit purse or shoes. It doesn't really seem to have a real victim. But there's a real lack of awareness on the part of consumers about how many products are counterfeit. According to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, counterfeiting costs U.S. businesses billions every year and results in the loss of 750,000 jobs. And this number, you know, obviously is growing as the supply grows. We really see frequent reports of the damage that these sales can do. It goes well beyond what impact they have on rightful brand owners' revenue and profits. You know, and at the very end of the spectrum, counterfeit trade can be linked to organized crime and other threats to national security and human rights. And obviously, as we mentioned earlier, the Internet's rapid growth, along with its instant global reach and that anonymity, has significantly escalated the situation. So the life cycle of a counterfeit product. An entire parallel online supply chain has grown up around these counterfeit goods. And these are taking advantage of those same online tools and techniques and best practices that legitimate brands use.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, we seem to have some difficulty with our audio. We're going to go back one slide and sort of pick up where we left off. We really apologize about that. All right.
Okay. Good. Okay. Thanks, Gina. So, yeah, just to reiterate for anybody that didn't hear this, these are just some of the types of products that are widely counterfeited. As you can see, as it crosses industry boundaries and can really have a massive impact on revenue across the board. So, some products don't cause bodily injury, and sometimes people don't think it's a crime to buy a counterfeit purse or shoes. They don't really think that there's any real victim, but there's just a real lack of awareness on the part of consumers as to, how many types of products can be counterfeit and are available online. As the U.S. Chamber of Commerce noted, the counterfeiting costs U.S. businesses in the billions every year and results in the loss of 750,000 jobs. This number is obviously going up. And we really see frequent reports of the damage that these sales do. It goes well beyond what impact they have on rightful brand owners' revenues and profits. There's also, counterfeit trade being linked to organized crime at the very end of the spectrum, and threats to national security and human rights. And obviously, as we mentioned earlier, the Internet's rapid growth and this instant global reach and the anonymity that it provides has significantly escalated the situation. All right, so the counterfeit of the life cycle of a counterfeit product. An entire parallel online supply chain has grown up around these counterfeit goods, and they're really taking advantage of the same online tools and best practices that legitimate brands use. So how are they obtained? We still can't.
I'm sorry, everyone. We seem to be having some technical difficulty. Bear with us, and we're going to try to give you audio.
All right, so let's pick up where we left off. So how are these goods obtained? They're obtained directly from the place where they're made, or also these B2B trade boards online or marketplaces often have listings for counterfeit goods. Then they are promoted using these same tactics as legitimate marketers, things like paid search ads, social media links, SEO tactics, cyber squatting, spam email, and they're steering traffic to their fakes. So not only are they using the same tactics, but they're also capitalizing on this legitimate product's brand equity. So in that way, they're really diminishing this marketing ROI of the legitimate brand. To give some idea of scope, one source found that 14% of searches on a branded product lead somewhere other than a legitimate site. So the tactics are really definitely working if you're not watching. They can also be promoted via spam email. That's something that's used frequently, as I'm sure we're all familiar with, for fake pharmaceuticals, software, luxury goods. They can also use techniques like cyber squatting, which is using branded terms and domain names to attract this web traffic and promote authenticity. So then there's these auction marketplaces where, really any casual search can pop up obviously counterfeit goods in the results. Then there's the social media with links to sites pushing their counterfeit products, including blogs, et cetera. As for some examples, we found 23,000 listings for unauthorized tablets in a single day. By the way, that's consumer electronics tablets, not pharmaceutical tablets. Almost 7,000 cyber squatted sites, and those generated about 75 million visits in a year. When we looked at the top 5 luxury brands, we found that the counterfeiters were attracting 120 million visits a year, and that was about half of the overall generated traffic. We also found more than 6,000 suspects selling 1.2 million online listings of counterfeit sports jerseys online, and that was generating nearly 25 million in revenue right there. So then they're distributed via a variety of online and offline methods. There are those B2B outlets, and the counterfeiters also use retail marketplaces or their own websites to supply counterfeit goods to consumers. For example, like a scammer could be buying fake goods on a wholesale site and then reselling them to consumers via digital channels, in addition to selling them in their brick and mortar locations. So they're covering multiple vectors of distribution all at once. Obviously, a customer can order directly online via a website or a marketplace listing like eBay, Craigslist, or Alibaba. Then they can also get them at these retail brick and mortar locations, or places like swap meets, where really with very little oversight, a person can set themselves up and move potentially large numbers of fake goods. And most people just think they're getting a good deal, probably because they expect to get a discount, just because everyone's selling low-cost items there. They can really sell a huge volume at these places with little or no threat of enforcement to deter them. So overall, the important thing to remember here is that to effectively choke off online counterfeit sales, any sort of deterrence is going to have to focus on both distribution and promotional channels to get at these counterfeit goods. All right, so here are a couple of examples of websites selling counterfeit goods. You can find these for almost any given consumer product. Here we have a couple of examples of pages where you can see the name has been cyber squatted to drive additional traffic. Wholesale brand name cosmetics.com and cheap brand cosmetics.com. As a brand, obviously you're going to know right away whether these are authorized outlets for your products, usually just by looking at the layout. But you can also do things like comparing the images on the pages with the copyrighted images, looking and seeing if you find any discrepancies in packaging or pricing, anything else that's visible, as well as hidden indicators like the registrant name or who is records. You really can confirm whether they are authorized or not, and thus whether they should be pursued. Here's a couple of examples of infringing listings on marketplaces. So in this case, it's a large Chinese marketplace for fake branded product chargers and for luxury purse knockoff on another marketplace. So not only do those images usually indicate whether an item is legitimate or counterfeit, but it also provides obviously very valuable information about the seller, depending on the marketplace policies. But most online channels provide mechanisms for dealing with counterfeit sales situations. Online marketplaces, they typically have these unique policies and procedures enabling brand owners to report these listings on a number of bases. They've all each got their unique enforcement path, so it's critical to understand how to best enforce on each discrete marketplace. But you can report infringing listings on a number of bases like trademark or copyright, et cetera. So it's really important to be able to identify those indicators and know which ones are going to have the best success rates for listing takedowns through the particular marketplace's policy themselves. Okay, and lastly, here are some of the myriad examples that we see out there on problematic social media content. So in the middle, there's a social media post with hashtag phishing, luring folks to a fake bank offer. It's actually a money laundering scheme. What they do is they're using the name of the legitimate bank, then they hashtag the bank name, and the small print says, do you have an account here and want to make some quick cash? Click here. So obviously unsophisticated viewers, what are they going to do? All they're going to see is fast money and that's my bank. So they go text the number that's advertised, and it's a throwaway cell phone. What ends up happening is then they become a mule for transferring money, money laundering scheme, and ultimately they're the ones who are going to be prosecuted, the money mule, not the fraudster. The fraudster is really not traceable. On the right, you'll see there's a fake online company Facebook group. for an airline, you can tell it's not legitimate because it has a period at the end of the name. So it's very, very subtle. It's not allowed, according to their marketing guidelines, to have that. So you know that that's fraudulent. Also, this impersonated social media page is set up to promote a survey. And so what they do is they say you're going to be eligible to win a round-trip ticket, and the survey is really endless. So 30 minutes later, the person who's clicked on it has given out all of this personal information in the survey, and is left with a very negative feeling about the brand that won't be separated out from because they don't know it's fraudulent. So on the left, obviously a cigarette company doesn't do this, targeting children with a cartoon on the package. So the fact that this even exists is really a major problem on all kinds of infringement. So what does this all mean for brands? So we've alluded to some of the issues that counterfeiting causes for brands, consumers, and the larger impact to the economy, but let's just take a closer look at the impact to the company. So how does it affect your bottom line? Loss of revenue with uncaptured sales when web traffic is diverted. Also, there's a huge problem of these fraudulent returns. A person buys a fake one and a real one, switches the two, and then gets a refund. By the time the fake product has gone back to the company and is identified as fake in the returns process, the money on the return is already gone, so it's a direct loss. That happens very frequently. Obviously, increase in customer service costs. If the products aren't working properly or they're failing, too quickly because they're fake, customer service department is going to have to deal with the brunt of this huge problem of warranty coverage and demands for refunds, which in and of themselves bleed additional revenue off. Counterfeit product availability also can cause very difficult and strained channel relationships. When genuine product is diverted into illegitimate sales channels. So as an example, you've got a clothing distributor, they're authorized to sell jeans at a lower price point in France than it's in the U.S., but then they're also selling in France at a lower price point than it's supposed to be in Europe. This is going to undercut legitimate sales, potentially region-wide, and all the other distributors are going to be really upset. They're losing sales themselves and often blame you for not really keeping tabs on this rogue seller. So then there's another side to it. Counterfeit product availability can also have significant impact on your brand reputation. This can really take many forms, but a big one is brand confusion. So like improper or fake labels on shoes with your logo can lead consumers into thinking that you're producing poor quality or ineffective or even dangerous products. Also, obviously, with social media being so prevalent, customers' brand confusion leads to this negative customer experience. Obviously, that can very quickly lead to bad press if it goes viral. Another negative customer experience might be when a customer who's purchased, say, counterfeit headphones tries to get the warranty coverage for the counterfeit products. They're not really able to get refunds from the sellers. The negative impression is really not separated from the unauthorized seller, so they're just going to blame the brand. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, there's severe revenue losses associated with counterfeiting, but consumer confidence in legitimate brands is going down with the prevalence going up, and this is going to lead to damaged brand reputation. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the consumer risk can be really huge. Like automotive brake pads that fail. That can also lead to other liabilities like lawsuits and recalls, et cetera. Just as a last example, so as I mentioned, I wanted to show an example of kind of how these things are overlapping. So this, we had an example of a consumer electronics company. They're experiencing this massive increase in customer complaints and questions, through these online report submissions and customer service calls. So there was a lot of anger that had to be diffused. It wasn't just about the bad products. They were really angry because they couldn't get their money back. They came to the company to solve the problem. It was overwhelming. It required dedicated staff just to explain that these were not legitimate products, but were bought from an illegitimate source and they had no warranty coverage. So just a lot of work had to go into convincing them that it wasn't their fault, and also assisting them for customer goodwill in getting refunds from their credit card companies, providing necessary documentation. So really these dual impacts are very much tied together in most cases. Your brand reputation and negative customer experience will tie directly in with your bottom line. So given the high stakes here, you really need to assess your organization's risk for counterfeiting and diversion and craft a brand protection program that's going to address the specific needs of your company. So you need to ask yourself about your level of awareness of where your brand is showing up online outside of official channels. You need to ask yourself questions like these, such as, do you promote your brand online? Usually the answer is yes, given the huge and growing statistics on global online commerce, and especially for those of you dialing in today. I just heard that Black Friday in-store shopping went down by 10% this year, and online shopping went up 14% over last year. So, another question to ask yourself is, are your products available for purchase outside of your own website? Think about these brick and mortar locations, aftermarket sales as potential outlets as well as these other online channels. Excuse me. Also, are you using intermediaries or partners to get your products to your customers? If you do, then you're going to need the serious oversight there and monitoring to make sure that they're in full compliance and not causing any problems. Another one is, do your products cross these international boundaries? It's an important one to consider, and it's, again, usually the case these days, depending on the type of product, but it really can increase your risk because you're dealing with different laws, different levels of IP protection, and also you need to consider that how easy it is, just simply given the volume of imports and exports, how easy it is for counterfeiters to easily avoid customs inspections for imports. And you have to think about your supply chain. If you're not tracking or monitoring this with some very clear visibility, you don't know where the problems are coming up, and you have no ability to remediate the problems. And ultimately, if you're not paying attention, you're just letting the problem grow. All right, so now we've talked a lot about the problems. What would the solution look like? So most companies that are keeping tabs on brand protection have some basic form of internet monitoring in place. This usually takes the form, as you can see here, of some form of kind of technology assisted monitoring of the various vectors of the internet, and they're continually monitoring brand activity and abuse across these multiple touch points, including, like I've listed here, e-commerce sites, marketplaces, social media, plus mobile channels in some cases, email solicitation, and that includes, spam email and all those phishing attacks that happen in that digital channel. Some technology also has built-in online enforcement mechanisms, so depending on the area of the internet and really the level of sophistication of the technology. So then, with those infringing sites that are detected, it's acted on with these various online enforcement methods, including, third-party referrals to entities like ICANN, false whois claims, referrals to recommend test purchase targets, cease and desist letters to registrants and ISPs and registrars, or notifications. So this online anti-counterfeiting approach is really internet monitoring on an operational level. You're keeping tabs on these various vectors for online monitoring and deterrence, and these tools are typically detecting things like trademark and copyright abuse, stolen web traffic and sales, and impersonation, false association. So digital anti-counterfeiting program represents this operational approach to protecting brands against online abuse. Obviously, the infringement can occur in any of those areas, so brands need to stay on top of them from an operational monitoring and deterrence perspective. But, counterfeiters are becoming much more sophisticated all the time, and with new tactics and staying a step ahead of enforcement in both global online operations and the physical world. And companies are really having a hard time seeing the full scope of their problems. So there are these tools available, again, to go after the offenders causing the most damage. To truly make an impact against counterfeiters, then you've got to do more than play defense. You've got to play offense as well to win the game. A good program is going to complement your operationally focused brand protection with this strategic approach, uncover these hidden patterns and relationships, leveraging those resources and expediting enforcement both online and on the ground. So what you need to do is, if you're connecting all the various facets of your brand protection strategy, you're going to accelerate ROI and internal efficiency. You're also going to be, as a wonderful side note, shielding your brand from infringement and protecting your customers and your revenue. So the key here really is to use data as your secret weapon. Obtain this key business intelligence, target the worst offenders, and focus your resources on where the risk is greatest. And you need to be looking both online and offline. Okay, so let's just put this all into context. Give us an idea of where we are today, where the brand protection needs to go, and how we need to evolve in order to meet the increasing challenges of global counterfeiting and the counterfeiter sophistication. So traditionally, as we mentioned, the main focus has been on this fairly basic online detection and enforcement with that operational approach. A brand protection would be focused on really addressing incidents on a one-off basis by security or legal departments, just as they come up, as they're found. Any trends that might be detected, like regional or seasonal trends, would be noted in retrospect, and that's usually going to be coming from the incomplete or that siloed information compiled into reports after the fact. And really, very importantly, a brand protection program or brand protection department in some cases has been really traditionally viewed as a cost center, a necessary expenditure to protect brand reputation and attempt to stem the losses, but with really very, very little in the way of true ROI. However, where we need to get is this more comprehensive strategy that I outlined in the last slide. So brands need to implement this more proactive strategy, and it's going to have to span digital and physical enforcement, and it's going to have a targeted approach against those worst offenders. We've really got to shift to preventative measures and predictive analytics. We've got to mine that data as much as possible in real time for any trends and insights as they are emerging, rather than in hindsight, and really shift our way of thinking about brand protection to begin to view it as more of a profit recovery discipline that's supported by teams across the company. So, that means the brand owners should be setting up a cross-functional task force to address the issue in a kind of a holistic, overarching manner. And stakeholders are going to it's probably going to vary by industry or enterprise, but really can include legal, marketing, risk management, and channel sales management, et cetera. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it over to Cami and talk a bit more about bridging the online and physical enforcement worlds and putting together that comprehensive strategy to protect your company's IP.
Thanks, Maya. So I want to just add a couple of points to the last slide just quickly. I think by default, people used to think that online enforcement was the only option for fighting the counterfeiting. But actually, as things have progressed, technology's advanced, so we have other options, which I'll discuss further down in a few minutes. And the other reason that I want to add is there's not only an increase of counterfeit sales online, but in the physical world as well. It's everywhere now. And one of the reasons is that people's supply chains are very, very porous now. The supply chains aren't as linear and direct anymore. They're more like networks, and they're much more complicated, so it's harder to monitor them. So let's talk about what not to do. Unfortunately, a lot of companies do nothing. And what happens when you do that is problems get more serious and larger, and the problem becomes even more difficult to attack if you ever decide to go after it. You have more and more revenue loss, and there's more and more ongoing damage to your brand reputation. Some companies have decided to do enforcement manually online. And the problem with that is the problem's too large for you to be effective if you're doing it manually. You're going to need a ton of people to do it, and most people have one or two dedicated folks to take down however many they can take down in one day, and you're not going to impact your problem. And it also doesn't give you a full perspective of the scale and scope of your problem. The technology that we have today gets such large quantities of data that you can actually see trends and patterns and changes in buying patterns that you can use for marketing, targeting better marketing, and deciding where you want to focus your resources. Maya already talked about how operating in silos is really the wrong way to go. That way you have no cohesive strategy if different departments are doing different things. You're duplicating effort and wasting money, as Maya said, and you could actually impede other departments, and she talked about that as well. The other big key element in that is there's no centralized messaging or information being shared across the company about what brand protection is doing, what their mandate is, what their objectives are. And if you have a more centralized group, the messaging is current, everybody gets it at the same time, and the message is uniform across the company, which I think is really important. Another problem is that some companies treat all infringements equally, and this would tie back to trying to do it manually because you don't really understand the full scope and scale of the problem. The technology allows you to look at the largest networks of people causing you the most damage. And if you go after them first, you're going to have much more impact with your brand protection program. It's sort of the 80-20 rule, that 80% of your problems are probably caused by 20% of the bad actors. Let's see. And the other thing is people try to respond to every infringement, which goes back to you simply can't do it with the volume. So let's talk about what you should do to lay the groundwork for a successful brand protection program. Use the technology to gain visibility and scope and scale of the problem. Online monitoring allows you to do that and gives you a real baseline and helps you in your decision-making about where you want to focus your brand protection resources. Most brand protection programs are, budgets are very, very challenging, and they need to spend their money very, very wisely, and this helps them doing that. Also, by being able to discuss the scope and scale of the problem, getting budget is a lot of times easier if you can articulate that up to senior management about how bad the problem really is, because a lot of times they aren't really aware. Define your strategy and set clear objectives. I've seen people who just start brand protection, they go to do the online enforcement, and they think that's all they need to do, and they don't really understand what they're trying to accomplish or achieve. So if you have your cross-functional team in place, which I'll discuss in a minute, your decisions are going to be better, and your strategic plans are going to be more effective. And let's talk about developing a cross-functional team. Like Maya said, you should actually include all departments in the company that are touched or damaged by brand protection. So legal, sales, manufacturing, supply chain, et cetera. And bring those people in, I said, and have a dedicated team, not just occasionally. Have a dedicated team, because this way, like I said, the messaging about what brand protection is goes across the company, and everybody's moving in the same direction. To get your baseline started, you've got to establish your online monitoring to be able to prioritize your enforcement efforts. We talked about that earlier. Don't waste your money on the small fry. Go after the bigger actors that are causing you the most problems. And the other thing that I suggest you do is try and educate your consumers about the risks of buying from unauthorized sources. And one of the suggestions I have on that as a best practice is on your website, have a link to, say, safe buying guide, where you actually can kind of put up steps on how they can verify that the seller is an authorized dealer. And the other thing you could do is have a list of authorized retail sellers on your website as well that you can keep current, and customers can go there and double check to see if they're buying from legitimate people. The other one is educate your employees throughout the company. Most people don't have any idea what brand protection means, what you're trying to accomplish or achieve. And if you educate your internal employees on a regular basis, you're going to find that a lot of people have really good ideas on other things you could be doing in your enforcement program, or they can raise issues about certain problems that you weren't aware of that you really can address more easily. So let's talk about data analysis and actionable intelligence. I want to define actionable intelligence. A lot of people think that just a big accumulation of data is actionable intelligence, and that's not the case. Data does not become intelligence until you put it through a certain process. And if you look at the diagram, it begins with the monitoring and online enforcement. You aggregate and collect the data in large volume. You have professional people analyze it and look at it. They're looking for patterns, trends, changes in buying habits, which languages are, online sales. One company actually found out that a lot of their online sales were dedicated to Norway, a Norwegian language, which really surprised them. If you get that kind of information, that's great. But the other reason is you're going to be able to identify viable targets that you can actually impact. And the way to document that is to develop templates for different kinds of investigative reports. For example, you could have a report for a website violator, you could have a report for a marketplace violator, you could have different kind of report for a brick and mortar violator. And once you get these investigative reports put together, then you're able to go to law enforcement or go to your legal department and suggest criminal investigation, prosecution, or civil litigation. So mine your data, but put it through the process so it's actually useful for you. When you're, I wanted to go down into more of the details about how the intelligence is generated. If you look at the online enforcement, you get huge volumes of raw data. And as we said, that's not actionable intelligence. It becomes useful when you have it examined in detail, analyzed, rationalized, summarized, and all of these things actually put everything in context. So you can actually understand what's happening, and I call it telling the story, because when you can tell the story about what's happening, it's easier to go for civil litigation to get the attorneys on board, or it's also easier to go to law enforcement because they can actually see the viable targets and they're more willing to take those on. The mining the data gives you the scale of the problem. As we said, the worst offenders, identifies criminal networks, patterns of criminal activity, and the repeat offenders. And when you have the repeat offenders, sometimes you need to change tactics. If they keep coming up, your team should sit down and decide, well, a couple things we've tried before don't work. What else can we do next time to be more effective? So this is sort of a recap on the reports, because in the physical world, you need viable targets. You need bodies or locations that you can go after. You want to have the maximum impact on your spend for criminal or civil litigation. And that's your goal, is to go after and shut down as many of these sellers as possible. And in order to do that, you need to be able to support your investigative reports with test purchases. You have to have hard physical evidence in hand before you can start civil litigation, as you know, or before you can go to law enforcement and get them to take on an investigation. Most law enforcement agencies are really, really strapped budget-wise and resource-wise, manpower-wise, and they aren't able to take on all the cases. So you need to have your reports be really, really as comprehensive and concise as possible so that they'll be interested in taking it on because they can see that it can be successfully pursued. So let's talk about which kind of enforcement is right for your brand. Like I said, some people are comfortable only doing the online, but because of the supply now in the offline world, there's options for doing more in the offline, in the physical world. And when you get your team together, you can discuss what are your specific needs. And this is going to be industry and company specific. There's no formula or cookie cutter process for running a brand protection program. You're going to have unique needs. You're going to have different mandates from senior management, different focuses. So each company is going to have kind of a unique program put in place. Be really clear on your objectives, because sometimes I've seen people come in and they've got 100 things they want to do all at one time, and everybody becomes paralyzed. They don't know where to start. So be really clear, and then just start somewhere. Start where you stand and then you can expand and phase in the other objectives as you move along. Some companies are really, really risk averse. They don't want to do civil litigation because of the bad publicity or press. They don't want to put the resources towards civil litigation. They're concerned that law enforcement, if they take on cases, is going to leak information that they're working for these big companies, and you're worried about social media taking on negative discussions about what you're doing as a big corporation against the little guy, that kind of thing. And for certain industries like pharma and medical devices, you're going to have governmental regulations that you've got to follow. So one of the best practices is you have to actually stay current on those because they're changing all the time. And you need to be aware of that so that your enforcement strategies align. For attorneys, if you're going to take action, really do your research on legal precedent. The court decisions coming in now are different. I'm happy to say that there's more and more success with civil litigation against counterfeiting, which is really encouraging. And like I said before, consider what kind of impact you want from publicity. Do you want publicity or not? One of the companies I worked for, we wanted as much publicity globally as possible because it spread the message to the bad guy actors that we're going to come after you if we can find you. It demonstrated to our consumers that we're doing everything we can to protect you. It also kept all of our channel partners really happy because it demonstrated that we were being as proactive as possible to not only protect our revenue, but to protect their revenue and sales. So let's talk about the test buys and how important they are. Like I said, you have to have physical evidence before you can proceed in any direction. My recommendation as a best practice is that you use experienced, licensed, third-party investigative companies or firms to do that, because if you have that done, they are fully aware of all the legal requirements as far as documenting how the test purchase was performed, who performed the test purchase, on what date, from whom the product was purchased, for what price. They know how to handle the evidence when it comes in, how to document it with photographs, how to label and inventory the evidence, how to store it, and most importantly, they know how to follow the chain of custody, all the legal requirements for that. And when you do this, your evidence is really ironclad. Nobody can challenge it as having ever been tampered with, because you can document every step of the way, how you received it, where it went. Another benefit from doing using your big data and actionable intelligence identifying big bad actors is when you do the networks and you find out, some networks are 50 websites, but more and more we're seeing websites with hundreds and hundreds of linked websites or even thousands. You're going to need fewer and fewer test purchases to support your investigative or civil action on that way, and a lot of brand protection programs are challenged budget-wise when they have to do a lot of test purchases. So if you're doing a lot of smaller one-off investigations on individuals, you're going to be doing a lot more test purchases. So there again, prioritize and go after the bigger players. So when you've got your investigative report together and you've got your evidence in hand and you decide you want to go to law enforcement to see if they'll take it on for criminal investigation or prosecution, you have to go to the right law enforcement agency. Sometimes people don't know where to go. So my best practice recommendation on that is reach out to other people in your industry and ask them who they've used in these different agencies, where they've gone. And a lot of times I've even seen, even in my own experience, I'm not sure which agency to go to, so I'll reach out to one, ask them if this is the kind of work they do. If they don't, they're always happy to refer me or make introductions to people in the correct agency to help us do that. When you go to law enforcement, you need to make sure that your investigation is as complete as possible, and this goes back to the resource issue that law enforcement agencies are facing globally. The more complete you can make your investigation, I call it case in a box, the prettier it is tied up with the bow with the evidence, the more likely they're going to be able to take it on, because they can't take on every investigation when they're approached. They too have to prioritize and only go after investigations that look like they're going to be able to be successful. once you've worked with law enforcement agencies as well, you start to cultivate relationships, and these are really key. And in my own life experience, once I have that, if I have questions about anything, I can reach out to people I know in different agencies and ask them questions, and I always get answers and help. It's very, very supportive. So I found this with law enforcement, government agencies, and even attorneys. So it's just the best practice. Keep those relationships alive and stay in touch. Talk about some tips for working with law enforcement. There are certain pros and certain cons for working with law enforcement and going to them. The pros are, if you decide you want criminal investigation and prosecution, that's the way to go. There are unfortunately more cons when working with law enforcement, and a lot of brands are reluctant to go there. One, because you pass over complete ownership of the investigation to the agency. You lose all control. The law enforcement agency by law is not allowed to discuss an ongoing investigation with you at any time. So a lot of times you don't know what's happening with it. You don't know what the end result is. Another con is that sometimes agency mandates and directions change. And if that happens, your investigation can be stalled or just end right there. Other things that can impact it are you have supervisory changes on the investigative groups, or you have agents that transfer and the investigations kind of stall out because the cases don't go with them into their new units. So you've got to decide what you want, but I will also tell you another thing that brands are worried about is that law enforcement will not keep investigations confidential. I have found in my own experience that that's not the case. If you want it to be maintained and no publicity, most law enforcement agencies are very, very willing to try and help you do that. They aren't going out and broadcasting that they're working for you. Best practice when you're working for them is assign a single internal point of contact and have a backup person there. When law enforcement contacts your company, they need to have answers very, very quickly. So be as responsive as you can. Stay in touch with them and reach back. Don't wait 2 or 3 weeks to get to them. For example, if you have customs called you and they have a suspicious load of products that they put on hold, they only can hold that product for a certain amount of time. If they don't get a response to the brand, customs has to release that product into the marketplace. And I have friends in U.S. Customs, and I can tell you it's very, very frustrating for them when they really have high levels of confidence that the product counterfeits, but they can't confirm it with the brand. They don't like letting it go, but they have to by law. So keep that person engaged. And also that person needs to be versed in how to tell counterfeit from genuine products along all of your product lines, because a lot of times customers will send you photographs, and so you need to be able to discern from the pictures whether it's a fake or real. Provide comprehensive information and supporting evidence at the outset. Like I said, the better documentation you have for your test purchases, the more solid your investigation is going to be. And another best practice, especially in my experience that I found, is I built an external training program for law enforcement agencies. I would take a training package with me with counterfeit product and genuine product. Law enforcement like to be able to touch the product. They can feel the different textures, the different feelings of the boxes. They can feel the different, look at the different printing on the boxes. So try to build that into your brand protection program as an ongoing component and keep it moving forward. So I wanted to give you a quick case study of an end-to-end anti-counterfeiting success story. This is one I had a few years ago. A website in the UK was identified as violating a lot. We actually had some customer service complaints about them as well, so I put the information together. We performed an initial investigation with investigators in the UK to decide whether this was actually a worthwhile target to pursue and whether we were going to invest time and money in going after them. And he was. This guy had a very large operation going, and he was selling a lot of volume. We did 3 test purchases from him over a span of a month and a half to show that it was an ongoing criminal enterprise, not that it was just we purchased one piece of counterfeit and he were to claim, oh, well, that was an accident. I didn't know it was fake. My supplier got it to me and I wasn't aware. If you do several buys, you can prove that they were fully aware and they know what's going on. Like I said, we did the preliminary investigation and we packaged it up for law enforcement. and we presented it to UK Trading Standards Service in the UK. And because we did such a good job and all the elements they needed to take on investigation were there, they were willing to take it on. And what was wonderful is they picked up the entire investigation and ran with it. We had to provide very, very little support, and financially they took on the full burden, which was also wonderful. And they performed the raids on his warehouses and homes, and what was fun about this one was when they raided his home, he had so much counterfeit product in his home, you had to go down his hallway sideways because the counterfeit was stacked floor to ceiling. That was the volume he was dealing in. We had a very successful outcome with this one. He was prosecuted by the High Court in the UK, and he was sentenced to 30 months in high-level prison with no chance of early parole. And our company wanted the media, as I said, so we had global visibility in the media and broadcast that this was a very successful investigation. So we had really, really good results on this one. And I'm seeing more and more of that out in the real world as more and more companies are moving into the real world. Law enforcement has been educated now. The courts are more educated and understand IP theft and losses better. So your judgments are getting to be more and more strong. So the key takeaways are have a broad program, be defensive and offensive, and use all three tools that are available, the online enforcement, use your civil litigation, and do criminal investigations. When I was running my own brand protection program, that's what I did. In my past, I'd worked for a company where all of our brand protection efforts were focused on criminal investigations only. That was great. The next company I worked for, they were only interested in civil litigation, so all of our investigations supported those. When I set up my own program and ran it globally, I realized I could do all three simultaneously, and that gave me the broadest enforcement ability and capabilities that I could put in place. Be proactive when you go after your key offenders. Don't just let them linger and watch them grow, because they would do grow. And if you identify a network of websites, say 50, if you leave it alone in 4 or 5 months, you're going to have 400 or 500 that are in the same network because the sales are increasing, and so they extend their reach with more and more websites. Use your actionable intelligence to bridge online and offline. It's not that hard to do, and the tools and expertise are available now that you can do that, and leverage it because you're going to have more impact with your brand protection program when you do that. Your evidence, you develop, like I said, really strong investigative reports supported by test purchases. I found every time I've gone to law enforcement, they want to take on good cases. They want to have successes because when they have a success, you have a success. So it's very, very a mutual and symbiotic relationship when you do that. And then enable law enforcement. Like I said, be available to them, be a resource for them, help them train and learn. And one of the best practices for that I know of is U.S. Customs has a secure intranet that they have online at all the ports of entry around the United States. And the inspectors use that intranet when they have suspicious products that they're looking at to go in, and it tells them how to determine whether a product is genuine or fake. And I found it to be a really, really useful tool. Now, the challenge on that is if you generate a lot of products and release a lot of products, somebody has to stay current on that and keep the intranet information for U.S. Customs current. But they really, really appreciate it. The other caveat on that one is they are not able to seize or hold products unless you have registered your trademarks with U.S. Customs. So a lot of companies haven't gotten around to doing that, but that's actually really an important element on that. So that kind of wraps it up, and we'd love to answer some of your questions, so please send them in.
Great. Thank you, Cami. Thank you, Maya. That was a great presentation. And thank you, everybody, tuning in for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. We do have some questions that came in, so let's take a look at them. The first one, do counterfeiters typically challenge formal legal actions? For example, do they hire attorneys to defend civil lawsuits or criminal prosecutions?
what I found in my experience is in the United States, if they have a big operation, they will usually try and defend. Now, on some of the smaller civil suits I worked on, they always paid up because the damages were so high with all the statutes for copyright and trademark infringement that the numbers, the totals were very, very significant. So in one case, we seized a beautiful home in Florida. We seized cars, and that really had an impact on those people. But yes, be prepared to have them challenge you. But you never know. Now, overseas, that's a different story. If you're going after targets in China and you're trying to seize websites and assume ownership of those, very, very rarely have I seen them legally challenged because they don't have the ability or means or know-how to operate in the U.S. Judicial system.
Let me add to that, actually, and to Cammy's experience as well, that there's another sort of component to it, which is when you're filing suits against with an addendum that has a listing of potentially hundreds of unauthorized websites or rogue websites. Often those go unchallenged, and so the default judgment is what goes, what is entered, and that is what enables the collection potentially of monies associated with those websites.
Also, what's wonderful about that is that you have supplemental orders. So if there were judgment against one network at one time, if the network pops back up, there's just going with the supplemental order, and you actually get those websites as well. And once you own them, you can either use them, shut them down, or some people actually sell them and generate revenue that way.
Or use them as customer education windows to divert to legitimate traffic sites, or also just as this site was seized for a fake, for selling fakes, and you should be aware that this is a prevalent problem.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more questions. What are the most important online channels to monitor?
I can take that one. Yeah. So that's a good question. People are always trying to figure out what they need to do in terms of fitting in in a particular budget. So I want to caveat this by saying that really what you need is an anti-counterfeiting solution, and depending on your industry or your types of products or your focus, hopefully you've got the focus of a cross-departmental team. But it's hard to make generalizations. Obviously, websites, online marketplaces, those exchange sites, social media is also incredibly important, and I would say also mobile. But in general, you really need to take a closer look at where the landscape of abuse is happening for your particular brand, and make a decision based on that.
Also, to leverage on that answer, I should have discussed earlier, when you have a cross-functional team in place, it's much easier to spread the brand protection budget across the different departments, so there's not one department carrying the full burden of that cost. Because like Maya discussed earlier, it's typically a cost center. It's typically, companies are reluctant to spend the money, but if you can actually spread the pain, it's a lot easier to kind of keep it in place.
And then people are all bought in, cross-functionally, yep.
Okay. So we'll just take one more question. How effective do you consider notices to registrars or ISPs regarding false who is or infringement notices? Do you get responses that are effective?
Yeah, I can take that one. So there are varying degrees of success. We have a lot of success because we've just put together a lot of best practices that are outlet specific. So certain types of those types of enforcement actions will work better on some places than others, and we just happen to know at this point which will be the most effective. Definitely, compliance is high if you've got your ducks in a row.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. That was such a great presentation today. I'd also like to thank everybody tuning in for your participation. We did have some really good questions come in that helped to draw out some additional information. As a reminder, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the webinar's presentation slides and a recording within the next couple of days, so you can be on the lookout for that email. For those of you who joined us for CLE credit, We will be including a link in the email that will allow you to obtain your CLE certificate of attendance. Anyone who was not logged into the presentation for its entire duration may not be eligible to receive CLE credit. CLE has been approved for New York, New Jersey, and California, and if you're interested in obtaining CLE for your state, you can reach out to me by tomorrow and I will apply for credit on your behalf. If you have any additional questions about the presentation or CLE, or for more information on MarkMonitor, please reach out to us. That concludes our webinar for today. Thanks again for tuning in, and have a great day, everyone.